All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for the February CISMA monthly CISMA call. I'm happy to be here with Diane Sturgeon, who's going to give a presentation for us today. Just as a quick reminder, we put on these calls to kind of keep everyone in the CISMA on the same page and keep everyone informed as to some things that are going on within CISMA area, whether that's from the individual CISMAs or from researchers who are working on invasive species. I'm going to ask that everyone who hops in at the moment is going to mute themselves. We'll have the opportunity for a Q&A at the end of the session. But if you do have questions throughout the course of the presentation, feel free to drop them in the chat and I can read them off at the end of the presentation. Um, so today's sort of quick agenda, we're going to go through the presentation here with Dr. Surgeon, and then I'll give everyone the general FISC updates that we have set up for you. So with that, if you want to take it away, Diane, I guess I can very quickly introduce you. Diane is a postdoc who works with the Invasion Science Institute here at the University of Florida, and her work revolves around researching the social dynamics and the human dimensions of invasive species issues. And it's on that topic that we've kind of invited her to present on her research. So with that, I will pass it off to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Christian. Yeah, so thank you for having me today. And so I want to start off. We'll go into the details of my research, but I also want to kind of start broad and we'll go through some hopefully some useful social science tools for everyone. So I want to start with a scenario that may be familiar to many of you, and you have a management plan that's scientifically sound, well-funded, ready to go, and it doesn't move forward the way you expect it. Maybe it's a landowner has concerns about granting access, the community raises questions you hadn't anticipated, a stakeholder group you didn't know about shows up with a perspective that changes the conversation. So this is where my research, my science comes in. Christian introduced me. I'm Diane Sturgeon. I have a few affiliations, but I'm also a social scientist at the Invasion Science Institute um, at UF, and I'm one of the Institute's first social scientists. And my research focuses on values and attitudes and decision making shape whether management efforts succeed or fail. So I want to talk through some of what I've learned through my pet trade research. This is from a few years back, though, and give you some practical communication tools that you can take back to your systems. So, so some may be familiar, some may not with what this photo is representing, but this is a photo from Florida Keys, which was a public response to a genetically modified mosquito program. And scientifically, the program had strong support. So ecologically, it made sense, but people had concerns that hadn't been addressed and fears that hadn't necessarily been acknowledged. And then this led into a controversy. And this is a pattern we may see over and over in different scenarios. We develop strong biological solutions, and then that human element catches us off guard. So I think many may have experienced some version of this to a degree. So what I want to try to help start to do is flip this script, hopefully, and instead of being surprised by this human element, we can anticipate and actually maybe work with the public and use social science to make management more effective. Okay. Um, so I think this is a really this is a few years old now, but I think this is a really interesting figure to really useful. And at the time of the figure, there was 60% of U.S. land is privately owned, so 133 million acres covered by invasive plants. That's just this is what this paper studied plants. I know we'll be talking about pets and other species, so transparency. I had the data that the paper had. Growing by 1.7 million acres every year. So what this means for your work, plants extrapolate to anything else. You can have the best management plan in the world, but landowner has questions or concerns that haven't been addressed. The plan doesn't move forward. Um, and it's it's having that perhaps successful treatment, that ideal treatment, but if there hasn't been the ability to communicate it, or if the public is not understanding, then there's going to be potential pushback. Oops, all right. So this is where social science kind of comes in. So there's a misconception that social science maybe is just questionnaires and asking people how they feel, or asking um, people how they feel about situations. So if there's a broader scope than that, and I want to walk through 5 capabilities quickly. It's descriptive, which helps map that social terrain the same way an ecologist maps physical habitat. So who are the players? What do they value? It's diagnostic. When a project stalls, we identify whether it's a knowledge gap, a trust issue, a framing problem, or something else. It's instrumental. We provide practical tools for messaging, meeting design, and outreach that can change, or potentially change, hopefully change behavior. It's generative. We hope to create new approaches to problems that have been stuck for years, maybe. And it's innovative. We like to develop new methods like adapting behavioral theories, economics to conservation contexts. And the bottom line, my thought on the topic is that social science doesn't just study problems, it provides solutions as well, which I feel like may resonate with a lot of you, like you too. So these are kind of 5 challenge categories for stakeholder engagement that are, I wouldn't say they're cited in literature as well as kind of like a overview of my experience too. So there's not like a citation for the direct 5, but like they are recurring themes throughout, just to be clear. So first, knowledge. Do stakeholders actually understand the species you're managing and why it matters? And if that answer is no, or it's often that answer could be no, or what they think may be wrong. So then we have second is public awareness. Can you reach the stakeholders? Is that even something that you're able to do in the situation? And do you know if there's a problem or not, or if are you hearing anything? Then there's third, cooperation and coordination. So even when people know and care, right, getting them to work together across agencies between private and public, that's a challenge. So attitudes and emotions. This one can surprise people. I think stakeholders have emotional relationships with species, opinions about government, about scientists, and those attitudes drive those behavior more than facts do, or can, and often do. And then, of course, regulatory challenges where legal requirements that create friction between groups that could or should be working together. Oops. Oh, that's a weird. I don't know why it has just that last one. It was like spoiler for the very last bullet. So this is where we're going to start focusing on that pet trade as an invasion. So the pet trade is this multi-billion-dollar global industry with thousands of species, tens of millions of individual animals shipped internationally and then within countries. And we have some numbers between 2001 2009 alone, over 1,800 reptile and amphibian species, accounting for more than 182 million individual live animals were traded in the United States. And then here in Florida, there's been studies showing that roughly 86 of established non-native herpetofauna can be attributed to the pet trade. So there are 4 main pathways by which pet trade species become invasive. So we see pet owners can release animals they're no longer able to keep. Importers and commercial sellers may release animals as part of business practice. But then, of course, there's also animals that accidentally escape. So there might be a lot of blame on one or the other, but there's this idea that it can happen both accidental, purposeful, unintentional. So then underlying all of this, we have regulations that haven't kept pace necessarily or been able to keep pace with scale of trade. So the natural side, science side, has been studied quite a bit, and we see, we can do some economics too, and um, we know a lot about species and traits, but what has been missing, and that we're trying to fill in a lot of those gaps, is that human side, and what do people involved in the system think? So this is from I don't know why those bullets are off. It's kind of weird, but so my research has provided the opportunity to have conducted 29 in-depth interviews with key stakeholders from Florida's pet trade. And we talked to non-native pet owners and enthusiasts and pet sellers and breeders, private travelers, government agents, invasion ecologists, and conservation organizations. And then it was quite a lot of people because many of these people also wore multiple hats. So like a breeder who might be a seller who's also a pet owner. So there is a lot of, crossing of those identities, you might want to say. So they brought really layered perspectives, and these interviews ranged from 25 minutes to 2 hours, averaging 47 minutes, with people having a lot to say and sharing some very incredibly valuable insight. So, um, so we had, let's think, oh yeah, so stakeholders. So what we had was key finding of these stakeholders judging by regulations by feasibility, not just ecological merit. And I'm using two different screens, which was clearly a bigger task than I had thought was going to be. Let me just get back to where I was. All right. So I have the four themes. Sorry, there we go. Four themes emerged from the research I was doing. So we have these key findings, but then there's these four overall themes that emerged, which was this widespread gap in awareness about full range of invasive species. And with out of the 29 stakeholders, people who were deeply engaged in the non-native species world, 24 of them focused exclusively on ecological impacts, talking about pythons eating native species, tegus outcompeting native wildlife. But the economic costs and the human health and safety dimensions really came up. And then that highlights this real opportunity that if we can broaden the conversation about what invasive species cost us beyond ecology, we can build broader coalitions of support. So then this second that came out was thinking about how stakeholder groups now interact within each other, and different groups tended to attribute the invasion risk to a single pathway and to other groups' actions rather than maybe identifying like a shared system-wide challenge. And so breeders maybe emphasized pet owner releases, pet owners maybe pointed to hurricanes, and there's some mentions of Hurricane Andrew as a primary driver, and others focused on commercial. So we just see that there's a lot of different narratives going on, and maybe you know, it is that natural human tendency to see our own role in things more charitably, but that also makes it harder for collective action when there isn't maybe a shared understanding of the problem. So there's maybe this space to not like, there's a need to discuss it, but not as maybe like a blame game, but as this like shared understanding of a problem that we can all acknowledge and therefore work together for that collective action. Then we had the stakeholders evaluating potential regulations primarily through feasibility lenses, rather not just the ecological merit, which makes sense, of course. Um, so feasibility isn't just this practical concern, but it is the lens through which stakeholders evaluated whether the solutions were even credible. So it was like they would acknowledge, like, oh, that is a good idea, but like they would be hesitant to actually say they support it in that they know it's like not even feasible, which is interesting because like you could say like kind of the question might be like what in an ideal world, what would this be? So those bleed into each other. And then find the most consistent finding across all of them was between and within stakeholder groups needing strengthening. So there's these trust gaps, which kind of links back to even that within, maybe assigning or not assigning blame in some ways. So some of the pet trade felt that intervention priorities didn't always align with what they saw as most effective. So some agency staff felt the trade wasn't taking sufficient responsibility, and then the trade maybe didn't trust each other's practices. So there's this, again, and it goes back to that perhaps inability to do collective action in some way, which I'm sure you all experience as, critical in natural resource management, but like in invasive species management, this like, collective action working across groups together. So this takeaway, I think, is what I keep reiterating, like participatory decision making, bringing stakeholders into the process, maybe early and transparently, that could improve compliance significantly. And of course, this is, I'm talking in specific ways about the pet trade. Um, of course, to like the context matters, and there's going to be limits, and we'll get into maybe some broader context later in the presentation to give some ideas. So I also had the opportunity to survey the Florida public, so more generally to understand their perspectives on the pet trade management. And the statewide survey looked at support for different types of interventions. So what was good, good news to hear, you could say, the public generally supported management interventions, and that support increased with concern about ecological, economic, and well-being effects of invasive species. So that's encouraging. That's a strong foundation to start on when we know with the general but we are looking at right the general public. So that is not identifying maybe some like smaller groups that might be more vocal or anything like that. So an important factor, speaking of which, like an important factor we found was trust in government's capacity to manage the trade playing a significant role. So we see now trust coming back in even with the public. And we also found that knowledge gap once again. And we looked at this in Slurians identifying native from non-native species, specifically like some more recent to some that have been established for decades. And we saw that there was, lower recognition of native versus invasive species or native versus non-native species. So we see these patterns applying beyond the pet trade as well as kind of what we're seeing there. So I was talking a lot, focusing on the pet trade. And that was some work from years ago. So I wanted to kind of take a pause and then start connecting across some of the different research projects that I'm more currently working on or have more recently worked on. But that is to then show like some of these patterns keep showing up, regardless of the system, to kind of show that we can maybe identify tools to use across different contexts. So I have, I think the some work I collaborated on this chameleon kind of case study might resonate. So in the pet trade, there's the strained relationships going back to pet trade, but strained relationships between industry agencies and the public with different narratives about the problem, making collective action difficult, as I mentioned. So in the freshwater fish research, we interviewed processors, distributors, and restaurants about incorporating invasive fish into the seafood commodity chain. Consumer preferences and attitudes uh, driving was, identified as driving utilization, not biology. So people's comfort level and feelings about a product shape whether they'll engage with it, regardless of what the science says, meaning even if a fish maybe was abundant to be caught and maybe a profit could be made because of that, ease of, but if there was a known pushback or non-interest from the public, then there was no interest in catching that fish. So there might be science that says like, oh, get this fish, tastes good and all that, but if it's not gonna, um, so then I want to jump to that panther chameleon case, which it illustrates how the situation can be complex when we don't account for human dimension maybe early on. And so from some research I collaborated on, we were studying the like after effects of a panther chameleon population, which is popular in the market in the trade. They're worth from anywhere from like 200 to 2,000 on the market. They were introduced what we believe in what was called ranching, where breeders intentionally introduced them to seed a free-ranging population to minimize maintenance costs. And kind of, my understanding got like this area got known on social media as having these chameleons that are worth a lot, and a lot of collectors came out. Like, so there's also this small community that maybe didn't even know these chameleons were there, is like inundated from like very clearly groups coming out for something. So word got out. And so that's where it's like asking, like, put yourself in those residents' shoes of like these or like that's how you could pick like these unfamiliar people started walking through the neighborhood at night with flashlights and with that very distinct like looking for the chameleons like splashing in the trees. So we wanted to understand how this impacted the residents, right? So how this kind of maybe you might think unrelated issue could then impact moving forward management in that area of a species. Um, so when we came in to study, um, or excuse me, even before then, like when researchers came in to study the actual population of chameleons and remove them, residents had started questioning what they were doing. And that's where those scientists came to me as social scientists to highlight this. And that's where we then went into like asking what people, how they were affected by this. And we saw that going out and discussing people's impact of having, the community come out with people looking and then explaining it was the chameleons, and then seeing that we started to hear people that expressed desire to protect these chameleons because they felt attached to them and didn't and thought, so here we have this completely different incident that might impact, a manager going into this town and be like, why are these people so attached to this chameleon? And it's because perhaps in the past, like it felt like they were being taken from them or something like that, um, so I just that's one of them, and I contrast that with like the mosquito control work that I've been able to participate in, dealing with public acceptance of novel technology, because this was an opportunity to engage with the community early and be working on not only understanding people's attitudes about it, but like working on outreach and extension work and seeing if we can actually like work with the community. So if we dig into why though, so we talked a lot, we talked some specific cases, but we can talk about these patterns again of like why stakeholders resist. Um, so there are seven, so there's identified in this really interesting paper, these 7 common reasons stakeholders may be hesitant to participate in management. They haven't been informed or engaged. They see the situation differently than managers do. They're uncertain that management will be effective. They have concerns about the methods being used. They consider the species a resource or something of value. They don't see connection to their own lives or the local economy, or they've developed an emotional connection to the species. So we see that last one in the chameleon study. These aren't necessarily character traits either, right? They're going to be responses to specific circumstances that we need to understand and address too. So it's not just limiting like these group of people might be like feel this way. It's actually we have to look at that context too. So these patterns show up across these different habitat and contexts, and whether you're dealing with aquatic invasives, escaped ornamental uh, plants or trade species, the specific species may change, but the human dynamics remain remarkably consistent. Which is actually pretty useful in that it means tools for building engagement are transferable as well. So this is one of my like favorite figures. It like opened up communication for me when I saw it, however many years ago. Um, and I think I just like it really helped me understand not just like how to communicate. I guess you go deep into that, which is this communication having 4 elements, right? So it's not just like what I say, what you say. It's like this idea of how you select the idea. So you have like basically I think of it as like what's in your head, what you want to say, what you mean to say, like what you said, what someone like hears, but then like what their head then like deciphers it at. So you have those 4. So like if you play a game of telephone, 4 people that can, the message can stay consistent, but the message could also be like really wonky by the end. So that has like helped me understand where it's like you might think you're like talking back and forth with someone and realizing like you're actually going through like 4 steps that you might have to identify. Um, and I think that's because what I love to do now is like dive into some of the behavioral theories. So like we looked at these like specific instances. I like to dive into behavioral theories to give you an idea why these patterns emerge and why, these tools are able to be traversed across them. But then you kind of go back to the basics of communication. So just oops. So just to go into one of the most well-established frameworks for understanding behavior change, which is that theory of planned behavior. And that identifies three factors that predict uh, whether someone will, or the behavioral intention, right? So, and there's the attitude. So do they think behavior is a good idea? Like attitudes towards it, subjective norms. Do they think people around them support this behavior? And then third is perceived behavioral control. Do you believe you're actually capable of doing it? So there's that idea of like, you have to consider, are you able to do it if you're actually going to take that action? So you think of it like that three-legged stool where you get rid of one of them, then that behavior doesn't happen. So it might be that someone wants to do a behavior, but they just don't feel like they can, versus someone might like have the ability and be like, "Ugh, not interested." So you have to like, navigate those differences. And so, one of the questions is like, how do you maybe navigate those differences? So I always like to pull up hope theory. I put these question marks only in that, like, while these theories have complexities and yes, and have been teased out and studied, there's like, I kind of take hope theory and think of it very straightforward of just like the concern that doom and gloom messaging might elicit apathy, or in that idea that when not given any hope, any idea, any feeling of agency, going back to that ability, right? But like that feeling of the ability to do something that is effective, and that like has an impact, then it's going to be like, okay, then, you know, why might I spend the energy on it, right? That elicits. So I think of that hope messaging promoting that ability to make a change. Like together we can restore healthy ecosystems, early actions prevent bigger problems. Like your participation makes a measurable difference, right? A little bit um, different messaging than, we're fighting a losing battle is probably too late, but let's like try anyway. Invasive species will destroy our ecosystems. Like definitely understand the like reasoning behind that terminology, right? Of trying to like motivate out of like some like, call to action. But that fear, I'm like, well, it's going to destroy our ecosystems. Like, okay, well, then I got other stuff to do because like you just told me it's going to destroy the ecosystem. But if you're like, you said like together we can restore these ecosystems. I'm like, okay, now they need me. So just that idea. And it's so the two components of hope, that pathway, knowledge of how to achieve goals, and then agency, that belief in capacity to take action. And I love like hope theory is probably my like favorite behavioral theory, as I'm sure you hear all the time people say. But I also then love to like throw this other theory that I love up, prospect theory, because it immediately um, kind of contradicts what I said about hope theory. So that's and only in that it shows like context matters and like there's different things, So, and this one is more of an economic one, but I think it applies with like uh, um, environment ecology and want to continue seeing that cross. But it's that idea that in prospect theory, the core insight is relatively simple, which is people are more motivated to avoid losing something than to gain something of equal value. So we feel losses about twice as strongly as equivalent gains, which is to say, right? I kind of said in the previous slide where it was like, don't say we're losing something, like we're gaining. So kind of, I think, put them together, right? Is the idea here. But it's this idea of losing the same $100, if we put it in money, is felt more strongly than gaining $100 that like you didn't have. So if you use this framing, um, like helps that might increase that call to action or that motivation. And I bring this, I love this is nothing to do with like natural resources or like invasive species, this book, just, but I found it really applied for my work and I like learned a lot from it. And I think for me, what really resonated for like stakeholder engagement or public engagement is this like quote from this book and really saying that listening is one of the highest, like if not the highest, displays of respect and expression of care. And like that act of listening can help build that, trust and demonstrate that, you know, there's a care for shared goals or shared, efforts. And then hopefully, um, even if those goals are different, that listening allows for willing to listen back, right? So if you listen to them, they maybe hopefully listen back. Sometimes they don't. I like to think they're lost. I'll move to the next one. So I think the practical application, I guess, straightforward is like asking stakeholders about their concerns along with or even before presenting solutions necessarily. That way, when you present the solutions, you can show how those solutions are addressing those concerns rather than saying, like, here are these things, and then maybe they don't see the connection. So I think in the single biggest differentiator between projects that build momentum and projects that encounter resistance, um, there's that that listening might be, something that's missing. So I want to go into the talking a little bit about a project project I'm working on, or like I get to be a part of in terms of. I keep doing that, skipping all the way ahead. So I wanted to give kind of this concrete example of what I'm talking about in terms of communication early on and where these principles come together. So it works uh, brought on as like social scientists to help work with them both create these applied as well as research goals and achieve those. So for the Anastasia Mosquito Control District, they're preparing to implement sterile insect technique where they release sterile male mosquitoes to reduce the wild population. Um, and it's a novel technology. And those are, of course, the exact kind of thing that can raise public questions, as we saw early on with the Florida Keys mosquito photo at the beginning. So, in knowing this, AMCD took a proactive approach and engaged early on and didn't want to wait for questions necessarily to come to them. So, before the SIT program was public, they were already planning outreach strategy and connected with, I was able to connect with them in terms of wanting to understand what the public thinks about mosquito control practices before rolling out. And then they used, you know, and these were goals of theirs and that we worked on together using like clear, accessible messaging. Um, let's sit on these mosquitoes, turning the acronym into something approachable, fun, hopefully, develop brochures, something memorable so they feel like they're, understanding and learning it, even having like FAQs to address questions, and then using multiple channels. Did some door hanging, some door to door knocking. We're building or going to be building towards some community meeting. And then having the actual feedback mechanisms of the survey to understand public perceptions, um, to um, to understand what people think and what they think about it, as well as educating. So now we have some planning of future community engagement and developing additional outreach materials based on like what we've learned to hopefully kind of address any maybe barriers that people felt in understanding. And like here we can compare to maybe that Florida Key situation. We could see how how critical of a step this can be to timing wise, right? In terms of timing. And we know that invasion science is critical timing, is critical in that. And the same general space, novel mosquito control technology in the Keys, and a public that had questions and concerns, and not having necessarily been a part of the conversation early on, they maybe felt surprised and that had some pushback, which caused this timeline. And I'm not saying outreach would have answered, outreach could have caused the pushback earlier, right? It's just not knowing, whereas there's this engagement approach that allows to understand that before maybe um, things get out of um, things get misunderstood or misframed. So I gave a talk, or I've given like a CEU talk in the past, and wanted to kind of give some kind of tried to come up with like a framework because I was like, what might be like useful tool to actually, with all this chat, 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 chat. So we're like wanting to go to this like toolkit section. So developing this kind of research informed decision tools. And this would be curious if anyone like has feedback, ever wants to like say like other things that you think would be good to like know about stakeholder based on your experience. But this is just kind of like general in what we're talking about. The knowledge assessment. Do they know what species you're targeting? Do they understand your methods and safety? Do they like, see connection between management, their own values? Then we talk about it from that pet trade research, even highly engaged stakeholders focused a lot on, if not exclusively on ecological impact. So there might be areas that dimensions that could be targeted for information that people don't know. An opportunity, not necessarily a problem. Attitude check. How do people feel about the species itself? Like we saw the residents thought the chameleons were beautiful and also felt like they were being taken from the community, so that inspired some protection. So we might want to check on that. And like, who do they trust for information, right? We might know that they need more information, but trusting who they have for the information. Um, and then cooperation factors, what's their biggest concern? What might make them comfortable participating? What make them uncomfortable participating? Um, and like what I think might, get forgotten, what would they need to recommend this to others, right? Because there's an opportunity in talking with stakeholders to maybe make your job easier. Or like I try to make my job easier. It's like if I get a stakeholder to talk to someone else for me, it's my job easier. So if like you can convince them, not only like convince them, not convince, but like if you talk to them and give them an understanding to the point where they're like, oh, this is great. Like I'll share this, like that's something where you can get like that word of mouth going. So I like to try to translate these to some maybe other scenarios to, I don't know, again, feedback at any point at the end or some email me anything. I wanted to try to apply. Um, so scenario one, I don't want chemicals near my water or my property. So this we might identify as a safety concern, and it's deeply felt. So data is important, but it might be work that's going to work best with paired addressing what's driving that concern. So leading with safety protocols, timing considerations, and showing that, taking that concern seriously as prioritizing safety too. Like here's our approach of building that trust. Then we have maybe the argument where they're like, those plants are fish, they look fine to me. Well, that's fine. But don't bother. Like they don't. And so that's different, right? That's going to be different than like a fear for health. So this is maybe the knowledge gap, maybe combined with the appreciation for the species. So maybe like those chameleon residents or for Floridians who maybe see monk parakeets, and or there's some of the birds that are not native and are attached. They might not see it as a problem because it's a positive experience overall for them, net positive or just neutral. So that's where maybe that economic and ecological impact evidence might be something to connect with. Um, but I think, before that, there is this opportunity to listen to why they value the species and hear about like, just caring because, connecting to natural resource, caring about natural resource, caring about the environment, caring about species, that's a way to connect, even if they might not understand the ecological impacts of caring and wanting to protect that species. And then let's see. So there's okay, it's too expensive, not my problem, not our responsibility. Um, this is going to be, maybe this comes from that perceived capacity issue out of those like theories. If the task feels too big or the cost is like too much, so maybe breaking it into manageable steps or identifying the like cost benefit, or I just identifying it in smaller chunks. It can be overwhelming all at once. So you could see how these different scenarios call for different approaches. So there is this need, this understanding of the situation that helps with identifying, a best response. I don't know why my bullets all came out weird. So I just want to try to pull everything together into this formula to build a message for like a stakeholder situation that might be helpful. So step one, seeing if you can connect to values. This comes from that theory of planned behavior. Even opening something like like most landowners in this area, you probably want to protect your property value and enjoy natural areas around you. So establishing that common ground, showing you understand they care or what they might care about before asking them to care about what you're coming to them with. Step two is frame that problem. So that's going to pull from prospect theory. If it's an urgent threat, that loss framing might be what is needed, right? Because it's like you could be losing this right now, so we got to gain it. But maybe longer term relationships that gain framing because you're saying like, okay, we're going to be working together to this ultimate goal. So you want to match the frame to the situation. Step three, my favorite, offer hope. Provide that pathway, that concrete how, build that sense of agency, that belief that you can make a difference, because both of those pieces are needed. So without hope, hope is just optimism. Without the belief that you can do it, that's just an overwhelming to-do list. So just like you gotta like that, that's why both are needed. And then we have that step four, call to action. And you can use those social norms. It's like that successful landowners, that word of mouth. People are really influenced by one another. So I think like the four steps, connect, frame, hope, action. I got to come up with an acronym. Maybe I'll change the words after some. Any ideas, please send them along. So a quick cheat sheet, match your strategy to the situation. If the stakeholder doesn't know the species is invasive, lead with education and connect to their values. This is a knowledge opportunity. If they know but aren't concerned, use loss framing and show the economic or personal impact. This is an engagement opportunity. If they care but feel overwhelmed, apply hope messaging and break the task into small steps. That's capacity building opportunity. If there's an existing relationship strain, lead with listening, build trust before presenting any solutions. This is a relationship building opportunity. And remember in that pet trade research, even when different groups have different narratives about the problem, you might, you won't find common ground by making a case more forcefully, understanding those other perspectives. And if you need long-term partnership, combining that game framing and social norms commit to sustained engagement. So that long game. Um, and the key insight is that understanding the situation first before choosing your communication strategy is going to make hopefully things more effective. One approach doesn't fit every situation. And these are just like the takeaways, my wrap ups. The human dimensions I like to see isn't an obstacle, but it's like a system to understand, just like an ecological system. And we've seen those patterns are consistent across contexts, whether it's pet trade, invasive plants, mosquito control, chameleon management, or fish utilization. The same challenges show up, which means the tools are transferable, or at least I like to think, hopefully, I hope they are. And you don't need to reinvent that wheel every time you encounter that new stakeholder situation, which could seem overwhelming and a lot to take on. And then there are those small shifts in how you communicate can make a big difference. Listening, listening before presenting, framing messages strategically, building hope instead of doom and gloom. And these are things that aren't necessarily expensive or complicated, and things that can be implemented, when the situation calls, and is like a toolkit. I like to think of it as my toolkit for, working with the public. So with that, that is what I've had for you. I kind of just leave up my hopefully takeaways. I could put my email in there. I think if I really wanted to put in
Yeah,
the chat.
likewise, I'm always happy to, if anybody has questions for Diane later on, I'm always happy to connect you all if that's the most convenient way to do it. Um, but thank you very much. I love the way that you've wrapped up with a toolkit, or some kind of take homes that seem like they are very applicable. Because gosh, I mean, throughout the entirety of your presentation, I was just having almost war flashbacks of different management situations that I've been in, where I'm just like, God, I wish I had sort of this framework of conceptualizing how to even begin to approach this problem.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
so
it's a lot. Oh, yeah, like it's like, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I guess I do have a question though, based off of your mosquito work. Uh, I liked a lot of the messaging you had at the bottom of that flyer, the image that you had
Oh,
shared, where you kind of addressed really specific kinds of concerns, like, hey, do these
yeah,
mosquitoes increase the amount of biting mosquitoes, or
yeah,
the yellow fever risk? Um, so I guess my question really is, did you or the other collaborators on this project, did you do like a survey or something to identify those specific kinds of concerns in order to develop this kind of graphic? Like, what did that process look
yeah.
like in the front
So
end?
there's, yeah, for sure. So like that's a great question, and like you could take different routes depending on the context or like the scenario. So this was not a direct, these were not a direct survey of the public or like question or like maybe interviews with public, but it did come from maybe literature like on the technique in other areas. So that's an
Okay.
option. It is going to be stronger to do like a questionnaire with that public and identify. That's kind of a twofold is this presenting this information, having them do a survey, identifying, and then maybe, the next one would have more specific to that area. So that is one of those things where it's like, if it's something that, maybe is a little more common and there might be some background on it, you might have those tools already or like that information for you. But if it is something that could be potentially very specific to that area, you might want to do even like informal, community engagement discussions
Sure.
to identify those. So it could be a little bit, of what you have available to you.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. I just thought like the yellow fever thing was like very specific in my mind. And I was like, is that like out of a specific concern? Because in my mind, I think about mosquitoes in Florida and I'm like malaria or, a couple other more high profile things. But I guess,
That
anyways,
is true. Well, and I will say that while you bring up a good point in that, I think that might also be related to goals of the management, right? So
sure.
maybe this was an opportunity if I'm thinking back like of like, right, this FAQ was also an opportunity to have additional information on it. So like you're right, the yellow fever is oddly specific. So there's also this element of like maybe bringing in some knowledge in those FAQs of like maybe the question would be, does SIT pose any threat to the environment? But this was targeting yellow fever
Hmm.
or like mosquitoes that carry yellow fever. So that was an added element. So that's another one where it's like you might want to consider those contexts.
Cool. Yeah, I think I really wish this was almost like a workshop. It'd be really cool if we all had like a moment to think about situations we've encountered where we're like, okay, I have this problem. How might we consider messaging? Um, That's not a terrible idea. If there is someone in the chat who has a scenario maybe that you're dealing with, maybe we can brainstorm quickly together. Otherwise, I can open it up just to general questions as well.
It has been one of the great, like what's been really a cool opportunity on the like research side of things is learning about different systems because people keep like hearing social science and being like, okay, like we could use help on like the study species of humans in this area. And so like
Yes.
I get to learn like the ecological context of a lot of different areas, which I found helpful and like patterns and stuff like that, so it's a really cool opportunity to learn as well across all these and how different, yeah, like how the different species can have different, very different, uh garner very different reactions.
Yeah. Yeah. Any questions from folks? Either in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask and say, because we could talk about herbicide application in aquatic settings. We could talk about rhesus macaques. We could talk about a whole number of things that I've encountered. It is cool how transferable this framework is for thinking about different species in different settings.
That's what I like about like behavioral theories is the exactly that like like that ability to see trends and transfer and hopefully then help make different, make it easier to work
Yeah,
together to like, solve issues.
Well, cool. If no one has any questions, then I can we can move on to some updates. Obviously, if you have questions later on, feel free to, I'm sure, like I said, email Diane, email myself, whomever, and we can connect some folks together. Um, cool. Let me go ahead. Thank you, Diane. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen again. As soon as I find ways technical difficulty. There we go. Cool. So I wanted to just go ahead and share some upcoming announcements and events that are going on. So the first of which we have an event coming up um, later in March. It's been called WISE, the Wildlife and Invasive Species Education Event. This is a good opportunity for you to come out and learn kind of actually a whole bunch of information on a suite of species, both invasive and native to Florida. So there's a slate of speakers. They're going to cover topics from black bears to alligators to invasive plants. Um, Gosh, a whole bunch of things. If you're interested in looking at the exact schedule of speakers and information, you can scan the Eventbrite QR code that I have there and look at the schedule. This is a 2-day event and there is registration costs, so you're going to want to do that ahead of time. But it should be a lot of really good information, and I wish I could go. Also, we're in the middle of weed wrangle season, so I wanted to go ahead and give a heads up for some upcoming weed wrangles. We have a Cypress Creek weed wrangle on the Treasure Coast CISMA on February 26th. I think that's tomorrow. Yes, so get ready. There are multiple sites in the First Coast Invasive Working Group alongside Jacksonville. Those are happening on February 28th. If you are interested in looking at those sites, go to Deb's digest email that she sent out earlier this month, and there are links to the Eventbrites and to all these different events. Likewise, March 7th is a busy day for a bunch of different SISMAs. Actually, no, sorry, these are just different work sites for the Central Florida SISMA. You have a number of different sites: Bear Creek, Castleberry, Craft Azalea Garden, and Lake Lotus. We also have a number of other events on the SISMA calendar. So March 3rd, Central Florida SISMA meeting will be virtual. Also March 3rd, speaking about chameleons, there's a joint SISMA Veiled Chameleon Survey in Brevard County, and that'll be in the evening. March 6th, we have the regular First Fridays with the Florida First Detector. That's a virtual meeting. March 10th, we have the 2026 SISMA Invasive Fish Roundup Planning Meeting. That is a virtually held meeting. March 11th, Osceola SISMA is meeting. That's a hybrid meeting, both in person and on Zoom or Teams. I can't remember. March 18th, North Central SISMA has their virtual meeting that month. March 19th, we have our monthly virtual Python patrol. And March 22nd, Lake Proctor EDR maps reporting field trip. I also wanted to remind everybody that the first tier of the tiered trainings is available. This is geared towards trainees and new employees. This is a free training, at least at this tier, which covers things like identifying invasive plants, some basic information about treatment approaches and field safety. This is a roughly 2-hour course that, as I mentioned, is being offered for free. You can go to the enrollment page via the QR code here. There will be 2 other tiers that are going to be released. Those will not be free, but they will have great information for training new crew members and also for larger scale management and more administrative tasks as well. We have a full slate for the rest of the year. So next month we'll be meeting here with Alex first to talk about changes to FWC's prohibited reptiles rules. So that should be a very good talk. And then likewise, the rest of the talks that we have queued up for the remainder of the year. And I hope that we will see you for those talks. With that, that's all that we have for you, and we are just about on time. So I want to thank everybody for coming out and participating in this call. And I hope that we'll see you next month. Just as a reminder, these calls are recorded and you can watch them on our YouTube page. This will be posted sometime probably the next week or so. Thanks, everyone, and have a great week.